it safe?
Is it legal?
Is it beyond belief?
Above reproach or below the radar?
Controversial?
From consumer fraud to scams and conspiracies.
Government and corporate corruption? Fact?
Or fiction?
You decide. Take the litmus test.
Thank you all for coming. As I say, my name's Bill Freeman. I'm the chaplain of Interfaith Congregation. And as I say on Sunday mornings, welcome to a place that values trust. Welcome to a place that values truth. Welcome to a place that values justice. Welcome to a place that values you. So thank you all very much for coming. You came to hear the author of Blackwater, the winner of the George Pope Book Award, a man who is bringing truth to Holland and the world. So please join me in welcoming Jeremy Scahill.
You know, it was interesting when Bill Freeman contacted me and asked me if I'd be willing to come out here. I said, sure. You know, if you can give me a plane ticket, I'll come out. And he wrote me back and said, I don't think you read my email carefully. I said I was from the Interfaith Congregation of Holland. We don't have any money. So anyway, I did it for the cookies that the nice woman gave me as I walked in. I don't know how many of you read the press release that was put out by the Tulip Time Festival organizers announcing Eric Prince's speech, but it said that he was going to talk about the value-based lessons of his childhood growing up here in Holland, Michigan. And now well, of course, media was not allowed to record or videotape Eric Prince's remarks today. That's how it works in a democratic society, where a man whose company generates 90% of its revenue, in his own estimate, from the federal government, meaning U.S. taxpayers, the idea that this man would be allowed to try to shut the press out of that event at first, and then try to say, well, the press can come, but they can't report on it. And then finally in the end say, okay, well, they can report on it, but they're not allowed to record it. You see, this is part of the fundamental problem with Eric Prince's business, Blackwater, is it's all about secrecy. It's all about deals done in private. And I can tell you, from reviewing what he said today, that what Eric Prince said to people at the Tulip Time luncheon is markedly different from what he says when he's behind closed doors, when no one is watching, when he's talking to the business elites, when he's talking to people from very conservative movements in this country, when he's talking to his cronies. He'll put forward one message at the Tulip Time luncheon, but then in private there's a different message. And how do we know this? We know this because I obtained a recording recently of a speech that Eric Prince gave in secret at the University of Michigan to the Young Presidents Organization, which is a sort of elite entrepreneur organization. And he gave this speech in January in front of ROTC commanders and cadets, business owners, executives, and his friends. And in that speech, he gave a very different version of events. He didn't mention this today at the Tulip Time luncheon, but Eric Prince is proposing right now that the US government send armed mercenaries into Yemen, Somalia, Saudi Arabia, and the oil-rich African nation of Nigeria. That is a proposal that would be so dangerous on so many levels that he would have to say it in private. He's not going to come out and say that in public. Who benefits from those kinds of policies? Well, Eric Prince and his company benefit from the use of these kinds of contractors, as they call them. My uncle does construction. I think of him as a contractor, not men with guns operating in a war zone for more money than our troops are paid. I don't think of those people as contractors, but that's the term du jour, so we'll use it for the time being. But you know who also benefits from it? Those that want to govern without accountability. Because if there's one thing that's become clear, the use of Eric Prince's forces from Blackwater and this army of other corporations that are making a killing off of the killing is that they provide political expediency for those politicians that don't want accountability. When you send in private forces, their deaths don't get counted in the official death toll. Their crimes largely go undocumented, unreported, and unpunished. There have been about 50 US soldiers that have been court-martialed on murder-related charges alone in Iraq. And yet there has been almost no accountability for the army of private contractors that operates at a 1-to-1 ratio with our United States military in these war zones. So either our military, they're a bunch of war criminals, and the private contractors are crossing guards and saints, or something is fundamentally wrong with that system. So what we're seeing is that Erik Prince offers a one-stop shop for the government to avoid accountability, to be able to operate in secret in countries where we don't have the US military, overtly. In fact, he said that in this speech that he didn't want people to hear and he didn't want recorded. He said that we can operate with a much smaller footprint to avoid the political problems of having to send in the US military publicly. Again, taking it away from any kind of accountability or oversight, which is mandated by our Constitution. The Congress has a right to oversee these policies. And by using Erik Prince's company and these other companies, they managed to put up yet another iron curtain that provides for an environment where people aren't going to be held accountable, even when they're operating with federal dollars in the name of the United States of America in these war zones. The other thing that Erik Prince did, and this is a man whose company has a substantial presence in Afghanistan right now under the Obama administration. Blackwater is supposedly no longer operating in Iraq, but they remain a central part of the US war in Afghanistan. Let me break something down for you. Under President Obama, Blackwater currently works for the Central Intelligence Agency in Afghanistan, where they provide security for the CIA, and also Erik Prince has his own private CIA that he runs called Total Intelligence Solutions. And this company, Total Intelligence Solutions, which is owned by Prince, markets itself as bringing CIA-type services to the corporate boardroom. They offer CIA-type services to Fortune 500 corporations, to foreign governments, and to the US government. So Erik Prince, who likes to talk about patriotism and the American way and Americans serving America, has a company that puts its services on the open market for hire by foreign governments, by corporations that may not have US national security at the center of their priorities. There could be competing agendas among the people that pay Erik Prince's companies, and yet no one wants to touch that in the Congress. 70% of all of the spending that's done in this country on intelligence, among the 18 intelligence agencies we have in this country, 70% of the money we spend is outsourced to private companies like Blackwater. That's a scandal. We talk about intelligence failures, and yet no one brings up the fact that so much of our national security apparatus is in the hands of companies whose bottom line is profit, not the national security of the United States. So he can talk all he wants about being a patriot and being an American serving America. But let's remember here that he puts the careers, the networks of contacts, the experience, the knowledge, the intelligence, the information of veterans, of the CIA, the FBI, the Special Forces, on the open market for hiring at the highest bidder level. Erik Prince right now has his men in Afghanistan, where, as I said, they work with the CIA. Let me give you a sense of how close to the epicenter of sensitive operations his company remains. When the CIA station at Forward Operating Base Chapman was bombed last December in Khost, Afghanistan, 8 CIA operatives were reported to have been killed initially. I talked to contacts that I have in the US Special Forces and military intelligence who said Blackwater guys had been killed there. And so I started to look into it, and then it was confirmed. 2 Blackwater men died that day. Do you guys know what was going on when that bombing took place? The CIA was meeting with a man who was a Jordanian that was described as the golden goose of US intelligence. He claimed to have just come from a meeting when the CIA first made contact with him with Ayman al-Zawahiri, the Al-Qaeda #2 man. So he was brought over the border from Pakistan into Afghanistan to go and meet with these top CIA officials that Blackwater was guarding in Afghanistan. And this man was able to get so close that he blew up 8 personnel that day and wounded others. Today, Erik Prince said no one under Blackwater's protection had ever been killed. What about that bombing, which was the deadliest attack against the CIA since the 1980s that we know of, that happened at Forward Operating Base Chapman? Now, by all accounts, what I've heard from people that are in the Congress, that serve on intelligence committees, the Blackwater men that were in the base that day acted heroically. One of them actually threw himself on the guy and attempted to cover him up and probably saved lives. But it's intellectually dishonest for Eric Prince to give a speech today and say that no one under Blackwater's protection had ever been killed. That happens in those war zones, and it happens in that business. But the point I'm making is this. When you put a private company at the center of those kinds of sensitive operations, particularly a company that has shown itself to be unaccountable, to thwart government attempts to gain information about their operations despite the fact that they're funded by U.S. taxpayers, a company that is simultaneously at the center of sensitive U.S. government operations and also works for private companies and multinational corporations, that represents a threat to our national security. That's what this radical outsourcing does. Blackwater remains the elite bodyguards for Ambassador Carl Eikenberry, in the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan. They help to protect Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. They guard members of Congress when they go over there. How on earth is a member of Congress going to investigate Blackwater when they're being guarded by Blackwater when they go into Afghanistan? You see, there's an inherent conflict of interest here. When the government starts to investigate them on the ground in these countries that they're operating, they realize, oh, they're actually our bodyguards too. In fact, when the FBI was dispatched to Baghdad to investigate the 2007 Nisour Square shooting, where 17 Iraqis were shot dead in Nisour Square by Blackwater Team Raven 23, September 16, 2007. When the FBI took Bush 10 days to deploy U.S. law enforcement to investigate the single greatest incident of killing of civilians by a private U.S. force. But he sends them there 10 days later, and when they're making their plans to go, it turns out that they were going to be guarded by Blackwater when they went to investigate Blackwater. So Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont raised a ruckus about this, and the FBI backed down and said, okay, we'll provide our own protection when we go to investigate Blackwater and not be guarded by Blackwater. The other thing that happened when Eric Prince spoke in January here in Michigan behind closed doors without the media, he thought he wasn't being recorded, so he spoke freely, is that he said that Blackwater controls 4 forward operating bases in Afghanistan, including forward operating base Lone Star, which is the closest base to the Afghan-Pakistan border. And Eric Prince said, we set it up, we staff it, we run it. And he's bragged that we, Blackwater, have the closest base to Pakistan. And out of this base, he runs, he said, a 200-person narcotics interdiction unit that he claims took down, it was responsible for the largest heroin bust, counter-narcotics bust in counter-narcotics history. They go after hashish, they go after heroin. In one case, his operatives are out there in the field. I mean, does it disturb you that this is who's doing this? Our private companies, not uniformed members of the United States military, not NATO countries, but a private for-profit corporation. His members of this elite unit are out there one day in July of last year, and they come across what Prince described as a sort of huge narcotics trafficking facility. And his personnel, he says, Blackwater personnel, called in NATO airstrikes. That they actually called in airstrikes, and he complained that NATO countries took responsibility for the action that day, but that it was actually Blackwater. Since when can a private individual call in airstrikes, not to mention just from the U.S. military, but from a international coalition of nations? This is being investigated right now by the United States Congress. Next week, you're going to start to see letters going to the Department of Defense about this. This is deeply offensive to people within the military chain of command, that you have a company that can operate outside of that chain of command and seemingly is able to just simply call in airstrikes. How do we know that that site was vetted? What process did it go through? How do we know what they actually hit that day? Because Eric Prince's forces from Blackwater say call in the planes to bomb this place? We don't necessarily have any way of verifying how they validated that target. He also described an operation that his forces did in Afghanistan, where the U.S. military had determined that they couldn't do a resupply drop to a U.S. military unit. Because there were too many lawyers involved, Eric Prince said. So Eric Prince's teams went and did this supply drop and brought in ammunition to a U.S. military unit. Now, I don't know the circumstances on the ground, and I'm not going to cast aspersions on anyone from the military that says we want to try to get ammo if we're in a battle anytime we need it. But that's not how it works. You can't just decide, I'm going to do something outside of the military chain of command because I believe that it's right. And it's that hubris that is at the center of a lot of the problems with Blackwater. We know better than the military how to do this. I hear stories all the time from people that are actually in the uniform of the United States military, that actually wear the U.S. flag, that say the Blackwater guys try to punk my commanding officer all the time. They'll come and they'll pull him aside and tell him how it is. And that they sort of are the rock stars of the war zone. So you have this company that is profiting off of the war, is operating outside of the military chain of command, and whose actions, and this is maybe the most important point that I'm going to make to you tonight, whose actions cause blowback against the United States. When Blackwater kills innocent civilians, do you think that those civilians say, oh, well, that was Blackwater, the civilians whose relatives died, well, it was Blackwater that did it, so we're going to somehow go find Blackwater to attack? They're going to go after the first Americans that they see. And you see it time and again, where private contractors do something, they kill someone, they shoot at someone on the road, they make a fresh enemy, and then weeks later or months later or years later, the U.S. military gets attacked for it because people in these countries that are being attacked don't perceive it as, well, you've got the private forces and then you have the military. It's all the Americans. But we don't talk about that calculus in this country. We don't talk about the way that these actions ultimately impact our national security.